What is the meaning of this fancy word epistemology? It comes from two words, that is episteme and logia. Episteme means knowledge and logia means study. So if we compound these two words, we get study of knowledge. So in philosophy, epistemology is the study of knowledge. The object of our study is knowledge itself. Okay. So before we move on and dive deep into what epistemology means, we need to understand that in philosophy there is a distinction between knowledge and belief. What's the distinction? Knowledge is certain, while belief is not certain. Okay, it may be true or it may not be true. Okay, so the fundamental question that epistemology asks is, what is knowledge? Okay, since it is trying to study what knowledge is. Okay, Plato gave us a very good definition of knowledge. The definition is, knowledge is justified true belief. Okay, so what does this word justified mean? Okay, justified means good reason. Okay, and true here means that it's a fact. Okay, so for a certain statement to be called as knowledge, okay, it must have good reason, and that reason must also be a fact. Okay, this is what the definition given by Plato means. So for a statement to be knowledge, it must be justified as well as it must be true. Only then such a belief is called as knowledge. Now let's try to understand this more clearly by using an example. Okay, our family guy, that is Dominic Toretto. Now he has a race tomorrow, and he has a thought in his mind that this car, his car, okay, this one, it is good for racing. This car is good for racing. Now he has a justification for such a belief. Okay, and the justification is that this car is good for racing because it is black in color. Okay, so when we hear this justification, does this justification sound good? Of course not. Okay, now the color of the car contributes almost nothing to how fast the car goes or how it performs in racing. Okay, it will not determine whether this car is good for racing or not. Okay, so it is not a good justification. Okay, so if this justification is not good, then his belief that this car is good for racing, it cannot be called as knowledge. Okay, it cannot be called as knowledge. Okay, he does not know it, he simply believes it. Okay, but let's try to understand from another perspective. Okay, suppose he has another justification. He says that this car is good for racing because it has a V12 engine which goes from 0 to 60 miles per hour in just 5 seconds. Now this is a fantastic justification. Okay, if this is found to be true, then indeed this car is good for racing. Okay, but then still the question remains whether this justification, whether it is a fact or not, whether this is true or not. So Dom here decides to go and check whether this justification is true or not. He goes and he pops the hood of the car and he sees, behold, this car is nothing but an empty shell. There is no engine here. Okay, so even though his justification was good, it is not a fact. It is not true. Right? So his justification is good, but since there is no engine, okay, his justification is false. Okay, and therefore since his justification is false, it is not knowledge. Okay, his statement that this car is good for racing, it is not knowledge, it is just a belief. Okay, he may believe that yes, this car has a V12 engine and goes from 0 to 60 miles per hour. Okay, but he does not know for sure that this car is good for racing because this is not a fact. Okay, but let's suppose that Dom goes and he finds that there is indeed a V12 engine inside the hood. Okay, and he is very happy. Okay, so not only that, he goes and he tests the car whether it goes from 0 to 60 miles per hour. Okay, and yes, he finds that yes, this car goes from 0 to 60 miles per hour in just 5 seconds. So both of the statements in his justification are found to be true. Yes, this car has a V12 engine, and yes, it goes from 0 to 60 miles per hour in just 5 seconds. So not only his justification is good, okay, it is also found to be a fact. Okay, so both are conditions in the definition, that is, a knowledge is justified true belief. His justification is good and it is also a fact. Therefore, his belief is now knowledge. It is certain. He knows for sure that this car is good for racing. It is no more a belief now. Okay, it's not a belief anymore. It is certain knowledge. Okay, now let's try to understand epistemology in much depth. What is epistemology? It tries to understand what does knowledge exactly mean. What consists of knowledge? It also tries to understand how do we know something? What is the process? Okay, it also tries to understand whether something that is called as knowledge, whether it is valid or whether it is invalid. Okay, we are going to explore all these questions in the upcoming lecture. It also tries to ask the question, what are the limits of knowledge? Whether can we know everything, or are there certain limitations to our understanding? Okay, this is also a question that epistemology tries to explore. So those of you who want a formal definition for epistemology, here it is. Epistemology is a branch of philosophy that deals with the theory, the nature, the scope, and the basis of knowledge. Okay, it investigates the very possibility of knowledge itself. Okay, so it explores whether knowledge is even possible or not. If it is possible, then what is the nature of knowledge, what is the scope of knowledge, and what are the basis of it. Okay, these are the functions that epistemology carries out. Okay, now why do we need to learn this down? Because on the basis of epistemology, both in the Western school of thought and the Indian school of thought, thinkers differ in their philosophy based on their epistemology. Okay, as their epistemology changes, their philosophy also changes. Okay, so for example, the Western philosophy is divided into two major classes based on their epistemology. Those classes are rationalism and empiricism. Okay, similarly in Indian schools as well, you have various thinkers who have various philosophies based on their epistemology. So let's try to have a brief example of Western philosophy, that is the rationalists and the empiricists. Okay, so rationalists believe that human mind has some core ideas inbuilt in their minds from birth. Okay, so for example, idea of existence, the idea of space, okay, these kind of ideas are inbuilt in our minds, and these ideas are used by us to know whether certain statement is knowledge or not. Okay, so rationalists believe that there are certain ideas in our minds, okay, that are present since birth. Now these ideas might have various sources, so depending upon the thinker, the source might differ. For example, some say that yes, these ideas are derived from God, some say that they are derived from past life, etc. Okay, empiricists on the other hand, they say that all knowledge is derived from sense experience. They hold that mind at birth is a blank slate. Okay, John Locke calls it tabula rasa. Okay, that means it's a blank slate, and experience writes on this blank slate. Okay, so whatever tools that we have, whatever ideas that we have, these come from our sense experience. Okay, the data that we gather from our senses, they form ideas in our minds, and these ideas are that we use to understand whether certain statement is knowledge or not. Okay, so this is the basic difference between rationalists and empiricists. We are going to understand these two camps in much details in the upcoming lectures as well. Okay, so Epistemology is very important, because the epistemology of a particular school or a thinker, it heavily impacts their metaphysics as well as their ethics. Okay, so if the epistemology of a thinker is different, his metaphysics is going to differ and his ethics is also going to differ from the norm, okay, depending upon his epistemology. So for example, the Indian school of thought, that is Charvaka, okay, these are Indian materialists, okay, they say that the only valid sources of knowledge are perception, only that which we can perceive, okay, only those things can be called as knowledge. Now since God, soul, afterlife, okay, these kind of things cannot be perceived, okay, therefore we do not know whether these things are true or not, okay, these are just beliefs, okay. So depending upon their epistemology, their metaphysics is impacted, okay. They do not believe in God, they do not believe in soul, they do not believe in afterlife. Now since they do not believe in God, they do not believe in soul or afterlife, their ethics is also impacted, okay. They say that the ultimate goal is pleasure, okay, that is hedonism, right. So their ethics is also impacted, okay, and the summum bonum, that is the ultimate goal of a human in his life, should be maximum pleasure, okay. So as you can see, their epistemology has heavily impacted their metaphysics as well as their ethics, okay. This is the reason we need to understand the epistemology of every thinker in detail, okay. All philosophical thoughts are basically divided into these three sections, that is epistemology, metaphysics and ethics. Such a division helps us in a better understanding of a philosophical school, okay. I hope that now you know what knowledge exactly is, what epistemology means, okay. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next video.